Hi, I'm Kevin Robinson, education activist. The math report card for the station, for the nation, our state, San Francisco, and San Francisco Unified School District schools across the city came out. And it doesn't look good for Black students. Over the next hour, we'll be discussing the hows, whys, and possible solutions to this ongoing issue around math and the Black student experience. Joining me are a couple people who know a little bit about math. He received his math degree from Harvard University, went on to receive his doctorate in math from Oxford. He's been a visiting professor at Caltech, a science fellow at Stanford, visiting professor of applied mathematics at MIT. He's currently a math professor at Morgan State University, Dr. Jonathan Farley. She received her math degree from Michigan State University. She served as pre-college engineering program coordinator while there, voted one of the top math teachers in Illinois, a finalist for the Presidential Award for Excellence in Math and Science Teaching, invited by First Lady Michelle Obama to highlight the importance of college readiness, and she's the creator of the Black Math Genius, Ms. Assata Moore. How you doing, guys? Can you hear me okay?
Fantastic. Thank you.
So at the outset, I mentioned the nation's math report card. It's called the NAEP. You want to take a guess where California ranks in math across the nation? Jonathan, what do you think California ranks?
I'll guess 40th. 40th.
40th. Okay. Yeah. Assata?
It's not a fair guess because I've seen the data.
Well, act like you don't know.
It went down.
It went down.
It went down from what we're used to. I mean, think Alabama now.
And actually, Jonathan, you're right there. We're ranked 39th.
Okay.
California is ranked 39th. We're tied with Alabama.
Mm-hmm.
And what's ironic is that California is about to surpass Germany for the fourth biggest economy on the planet. But yet we tie with Alabama when it comes to our students' math. That is astounding. But you know what? It gets even worse than that. In California, Black students for math proficiency, only 16% are at or above grade level for math. 16. So the inverse of that is, Doctor, 84%, right?
I don't have a calculator.
That's what it is.
I thought you were a calculator.
That's what it is.
84% of our Black
mathematicians
students
aren't for speed, you know.
84% of our Black students are not at math level. That's unconscionable. What's your take on that?
The schools are bad, and a lot of school systems focus on remedial education rather than creating students who are actually going to be the next Gauss or the next Ramanujan. Of course, you can't necessarily create them, but you can do something to help ensure that you have more students who are going to do very well. So that's, I think, one big problem. Also, a lot of school systems partner up with universities, schools of education. And in order to get a doctorate of education, you often have to come up with some outlandish new way of teaching 2 + 2 = 4. And you have to somehow demonstrate that the old way of teaching 2 + 2 = 4, the one that worked for several thousand years, somehow has to be completely transformed. And then when the new method crashes and burns, it doesn't matter because you've still got the $3 million grant and maybe you'll even get more. So an example of this is the New York City school system. A Harvard economist, Roland Fryer, got something like $6 million to do a particular program, not necessarily focused on math, but he wanted to provide economic incentives for students to get better grades. And I don't know why not having to work at McDonald's for the rest of your life isn't a sufficient economic incentive. But regardless, he wanted to provide an economic incentive for students to get better grades. I wrote an article in the journal Teachers College Record with a co-author, Hector Rosario, and we predicted that the experiment would fail. And it turned out the experiment did fail, according to Rowan Fryer and the New York City school system. They agreed. And so the result was that Rowan Fryer got, I believe, another $75 million to continue. So that's the problem.
Okay, let's drill down to San Francisco here. So San Francisco is one of the richest cities on earth. I think we have more billionaires per capita than any other city. If we can look at the first slide of San Francisco students, more importantly, San Francisco Unified, Black students and math proficiency, if you think the statewide was bad, as it stands right now, Black students in San Francisco, only 9% meet or exceed grade level math. That's not a misprint, 9%. So the inverse, 91% of our Black students in this city aren't at math level. That's unconscionable. The question is why? Assata, I've heard teachers say, well, math is racist. What's your thought on that?
Well, saying math is racist would be like saying a hammer is racist, right? And so if a racist person takes a hammer and starts smashing the heads of Black people, then you can say that that was a tool used in a racist act. So mathematics can be used as a tool to inflict harm to Black children, as what is being done here, that will impact them into adulthood. And so we spend a lot of time talking about looking at the data for the students. I would be interested in seeing how well the teachers do on these assessments. Because my argument is that our teachers aren't any stronger in the content than their students are. I would also add that we keep speaking about the achievement gap, but we're not speaking enough about the belief gap. And the belief gap is that people do not believe in the intellectual capacity of Black children the same way that they do others. Because if they did, when you believe in something, you put your all into it to make sure that it's going to work. So I think this is more so a teacher problem, an institutional education problem, than it is a Black student problem.
Okay. Jonathan, your thoughts?
Well, I'm not very good with numbers, but I think a significant percentage of teachers, at least 15 years ago when I was writing about this, and may have been just focused on New York City, but a significant number of math teachers weren't actually certified in math or weren't math majors or something along those lines that I remember. But also, talking about the stereotype threat, I actually met one of the psychologists who I guess is renowned for having come up with this concept. And he actually said that he didn't think that there were even a dozen, maybe not even half a dozen African Americans capable of getting tenure at Stanford University in the sciences. So it's pretty ironic that someone who's known for stereotype threat actually has this belief, which of course is a false belief also. I actually met him and handed him my CV, and which indicated that I had the second highest GPA when I graduated from Harvard, but I never heard from him. But I always like to infuse history in the teaching of math. And so we need not talk about how Euclid was Greek, because Euclid wasn't Greek. That's what I call one of the Greek myths that they
one of many.
Yes, that they have in the teaching of math and science. So he's a man living in Africa, so he's an African. And then some people like to argue about the complexion, if that matters. Well, if that matters, then look at Sadat. So we know what they consider to be the typical Egyptian.
We're going to get into that. Yeah, we're going to get into that in a little bit. About the mindset and what is working, what isn't working, and how do we tweak it. We're not looking for a panacea here, but obviously what we have and continue to do isn't working, and we're going to maybe have some possible solutions tonight. let's take a look at some of the drill down even more to some of the schools across our city. And being an educator, you know, I crisscross the city. I can see the haves, the have-nots. But even in schools, in the same school, you see a disparity and there's a huge gap there. Let's take a look at a school in the western part of town. It's a nice area socioeconomically. It's right by the beach and all. They have cafes and all that. We can pull up Claire Lilienthal Elementary. Is this right here? Yeah.
Yes, this is it here.
African American, Black students, 58 and 29. What's that?
87.
87. 87% of kids in this school are not at math level.
But look at all the green for Hispanic, white, and Asian students.
Yeah, I don't understand this. The same curriculum, the same classroom, and yet you have this huge disparity. Let's look at another one. Let's go to Presidio Middle School, which is right down the street from Claire Lilienthal. We have what? Is this the math? So can we go over the bar there? 8 and 4, so 12. So 20, so 88% not at math level. These numbers, yeah, it's mind-boggling. And again, another part of town, Lincoln High School. It's right there. There's a nice golf course right there, a couple blocks down from where the Giants and Warriors general managers live. But Black students at Lincoln High School, there's probably 1 or 2 kids that get to math, but this says 100%. And here's what gets me. It says, did not meet or nearly met. Well, that if you didn't meet it, you didn't meet it. Nearly met, that still means you didn't meet it.
Right.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Come on. It's
They didn't want that whole bar to be one color.
Yeah, you're like you're swimming. Well, here's the shore. Well, did you reach the shore? No, it got close. No, you're still in the water. You drowned. Basically. Either you met the shore or you did not nearly met the shore. So it's like I use it like analogy, like a D. To me, a D is basically an F plus. It should be A, B, C, and F, because the D, just throw that out. And we'll look at one more. Is this the one we can break down which one is this? This is Paul Revere Elementary. Again, it's in a cool area of town, you know, but we have
100% not me.
100% not met.
A perfect score. Yeah.
Yeah, we're 100. So Assata, you have something called the Black Math Genius. Can you tell us about that? Because when I hear that, and Jonathan, you touched on like the Egyptians and these other folks in history. When I hear that math is racist, I'm thinking, well, who built the pyramids? So, and even if when I never heard math is racist. I went to just regular school and never thought, oh, I can't figure this out. This must be racist. So why now all of a sudden that we were able to build the pyramids and pretty much create math, and now all of a sudden Black students don't seem to get it. So Assata, if you can tell us more about your project, the Black Math Genius, we're all ears.
Yes. So Black Math Genius program, actually, I started in the 90s, and at the time it was African Mathematical Genius. And what we were doing with students, 100% Black students in Lansing, Michigan at the time, is we were introducing them to advanced mathematical concepts very early. By the time they reached 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, because we were non-graded and departmentalized, they were taking AP Physics. They were passing the entrance exam to Lansing Community College. They were joining Bowling Green State University at Cedar Point for Physics Day. And we had visited, their culminating field trip was to look at mathematics. We took 40 students and parents to Egypt. And so one of the things is the cultural piece matters. If we were to go through and ask most educators, name some significant STEM contributors. Most people mention Musk, Steve Jobs, Bill Gates. They go on, all white men. I looked up the other day the top 25 movies that are mathematics related. 2 of the movies featured Black women. We know Hidden Figures, and the other one was the Queen of Katwe or something like that, right? One of them was on Donald Duck. One was on a Hispanic man. None were on Black men. Look at your data for the number of Black teachers that are in your district. When you look at it in Chicago, there are about 2.1% Black men teachers. And what is the graduation rate and those that go on to college in Chicago? It mimics the Black man representation. So representation matters, confidence matters. When our children are looking at mathematics, what they're seeing is that everyone else was great at this subject and we weren't. They're not told that it was a Black woman to first do mathematics. There's evidence of this over 40,000 years ago in the Lubombo region near Swaziland in South Africa. Then you have the Ishango bone that shows that the mathematics gets more advanced. They learn about the Pythagorean theorem, but they don't tell you that in the King's Chamber of the Great Pyramid, that they were already using this triple to devise the tombs for the pharaohs there. So they don't give our students to say, look, you can do this. In fact, it says the opposite. And so when you look at, you asked an important question earlier about how is this data so different, even within the same school? And so you have to look at, this is where it gets to the adults. 1, the teachers. 2, parenting and what resources are like. Because these children that you're looking at, the white children, the Asian children, they're going to do well wherever they go. A lot of that is economic disparity and resource disparity. Hispanics are kind of where we were at in the 60s with their drive and their purpose. We don't see a common purpose anymore. So our family structure is not feeding one where education is important. So this is a conversation, again, about adults. The teachers who, no matter what students are in front of them, are able to teach them, no matter what resources they have. So it's kind of like when Phil Jackson had the Bulls and had Michael Jordan. Didn't matter what coach they had. Michael Jordan was going to be Michael Jordan. Same thing in education. Those white students that have privilege and opportunity, those Asian students that have privilege and opportunity, they're going to do fine regardless. The true test of a teacher is, what do you do with students that are behind, that have partial understandings? How do you get them on grade level and move them? I'm working with school districts right now that I went into last year. I started with them. And so far, just this year, when I looked at their recent data, we've already turned things around. Who am I mostly working with? Teachers. I'm training teachers on how to work with our students, because what are the teachers doing? They're giving excuses. Well, our students, I can't teach them area and fractions if they don't know multiplication tables, if they don't know their factors. Yes, you can. But as a teacher, you're supposed to do both, even if they have gaps.
That's a good point you raised about mathematics, about multiplication tables. So I think what we're trying to do now is more like project-based, and there's no more rote memorization, that we've taken that out. I mean, what was wrong with that? I mean, Jonathan, did you go to public schools?
I did, yes.
And what was that like for you?
It was perfectly fine, to be perfectly honest. But I want to carry on with what my esteemed colleague has said. So speaking of Lansing, Michigan, or East Lansing, so Malcolm X talked about West Indian Archie. I don't know what happened to West Indian Archie, but presumably he was a Black mathematical genius. And I think that if we don't want to be so depressed with these statistics, we could try to separate out which of these students are still Black, but of a foreign. For example, something like 2/3 of Asians in America are actually foreign born. And while you can walk into America for the most part, if you come here legally, they're not going to let you in unless you've got 7 PhDs. And so it shouldn't be a surprise then that the statistics are going to be completely different for Asian students if you compare them to all Black students. But I have a hypothesis, I have a conjecture that if you were to look at, say, West Indian students or African students, maybe even specifically Nigerian students, you would actually find the same kinds of statistics. And also,
actually, there's already an actual data point on that your highest scoring math students, because I recently asked this in the PD, most people said Asians, it's actually West African, specifically Nigeria and Ghana.
Oh, excellent.
They're the highest scorers. And
when I went to Swaziland about 23 years ago, even though it was a poor country and they were being devastated by a certain epidemic, I thought the atmosphere was totally different than the atmosphere in Johannesburg, where you had open sewers in the streets. And I think it does have something to do with the fact that this is your country. Everybody in Swaziland was Swazi, unlike many African countries today where they're fighting in Rwanda or the Congo. So I think that probably makes a difference. And my colleague mentioned the family structure. I don't know if the point she made is similar to mine, so I don't speak for her, but my point on family structure is, do they have a family background that's going to insist that they study, that they work? For example, okay, this is pretty extreme, but maybe I won't give names. But there was a Harvard student who was competing to be #1 in his school when he was in school, and the girl who came #2 was also Asian, and apparently the father didn't like the fact that she came #2, and really didn't like it. So this is a different culture. My solution is that disruptive students can actually prevent other students from learning. I'll give a concrete example. I did a summer program in Rochester, New York many years ago, and there was a girl, my colleague created a version of the game NIM, which I'd never seen before. I don't think anyone had seen it before. I think my colleague had just made it up. It was like NIM, but a variation where you set the objects up in a triangular shape. There was one high school student or rising freshman who was beating all of us. My colleague who was a mathematician, myself, all the other students. And then I happened to be teaching in the Rochester STEM High School later that fall. This was a summer program. And then she was, when I was talking about mathematicians like Ramanujan and magic squares, she shouted out, "We don't care." Well, obviously there was the influence of the other students. She was a friend of one of the most disruptive students in the class. I wanted to kick that student out whenever he was disruptive, and the principal kept putting him back. Even when students made threats, like one student talked about doing a drive-by in my house, those students, I kicked them out, the principal put them back in. So 3% of the students can actually prevent 100% of the students from learning. Right. And I could give other examples of that. Right. So we need to be able to expel students, and then those students can get their GEDs later once they figure out that they can't do much on McDonald's hourly wage.
Yeah, I want to hear more about, what's up. Yeah, I want to hear more about your experience in school. Like, how are you? I mean, you're a Black man and you're a mathematician, so you kind of hit on this a little bit. We don't care. This whole, like, if you are good at math, then you are a nerd, or you're not down, or whatever. It's not good. So I think this is in some communities. Let's be honest, in the Black community, a lot of us say, well, if you're smart, then you're not one of us. You got to be cool, and being cool and being smart are not the same thing. So when you were in school, what was that like?
Well, I grew up in a white suburb of Rochester, New York called Brockport. So I had no Black classmates. I did have one Black friend when I was a small child, but he wasn't in my school classes. And so, but at the same time, in the classes themselves, there were a couple of racist students. and there were racist teachers who tried to, depress my grades.
Right.
But I was able to deal with it, and if need be, my parents were able to deal with it. Coming in, talking to the school administration or the teachers to make sure that they didn't do too much harm. So I got through all right.
Okay.
But yes, there is this attitude that you're acting white or something like that, which I've heard about, but I didn't have to experience that myself because there just weren't any Black students to make those kinds of comments.
Assata, how about you?
But if I can say one more thing, though.
Yeah.
So I got my doctorate at the University of Oxford, as you said, and there were also hardly any Blacks of any type, African American, at Oxford, and I was able to get my degree. So it somewhat pains me, not just get my degree, I got the highest awards they give to math graduate students. So it somewhat pains me when I hear African Americans talk about how you have to be always in the mix with other Blacks or you're not going to survive. It's clearly not the case. And in fact, I thrived more at Oxford, where there are almost no Blacks, than I did at Harvard. So I'm not going to, I don't want you to think I have a chip on my shoulder, but I did get the second highest GPA at Harvard. There was a kind of controversy, which you can read about in the 1991 edition of the Boston Globe, where the student that they gave the #1 prize to actually wasn't in my class at all. And it's the first time they ever did that. So, but at Oxford, they gave me the top award. So there was less racism in the place that's almost completely white than there was in the American university.
Assata, how about you growing up? What was that like?
I grew up south side of Chicago, mostly all Black, matter of fact. Teachers, majority white, but all Black students. I was a smart kid, but I didn't get flack for it. And I grew up, not in the best neighborhoods in Chicago, first starting off in a projects. But I do want to address a few things that were stated. One, we were speaking of, there's this stigma that in Black communities that being smart isn't cool. We always have to ask, well, where does that stem from, right? And so if we go back, being smart during a certain period of time in this country got you killed, right? And we have to look at how history plays a part. And because we don't fully know our history, we sometimes cut off the root and we're only looking at the stem. And we're saying, man, what a bad stem, without realizing, well, where this connotation of being smart in Black communities even come from. That's one thing. The other thing is when I was a principal, one of the policies I had was that I actually didn't suspend students. I suspended the parent. And so instead of kicking them out, because we have to think about how does this impact them into adulthood? And we have to be more mindful of our children. I'll say this. What has happened to us historically has happened to no other people. So our solutions have to look different. Okay. And so suspending parents, that gave the students an opportunity to still be in an educational setting as opposed to being at home, and parents an opportunity to come in and see what was going on and to build a relationship with the parent. The other thing is that when we speak about our experience, I went to Michigan State University, did not go to an HBCU or an all Black setting for college. But HBCUs do a much better job where there is majority Black students. They do a much better job of graduating Black students than the predominantly white institutions do. In fact, if we look back at Dr. Abdul-Aleem Shabazz, during his time when he was mathematics professor, I think starting off at Lincoln or whatever the other university was that he ended up at before passing, he was responsible for, at the time, I think like over 80% of the Black PhDs, a Black man. So there is something, because of the constructs created by this country around racism, race plays a huge part in these numbers. And I know people like to group together and say Black and brown, or look at the Hispanics. We cannot even compare our data to Hispanics. We have to look at this Black experience, this Black educational experience by itself. There is no other people that have, not Asians coming over here from others, not even West Africans, modern West Africans, even though we're all Black. But that experience similar, the most similar, because they deal with colonialism and they deal with racism, but no one can compare. We can't group Black and brown, those experiences. And so until we say, let's look at what's going on with Black children and what are the forces that are against them, not minority, not Black and brown, Black children. Okay, what has happened to the problems of where this stemmed from is very different from any other group of people. So again, the solutions have to be very different. And one of the things that the Black Math Genius focus on is confidence building.
Okay.
Historical context.
Yeah, let's talk about, so
Sure.
I mean, the Black Math Genius, like I said, I invited you because it seems that you have a different pathway to getting Black students thinking about math and self-confidence. So if you want to go ahead and like share some of the stuff you have on screen share.
Yeah, I'll do that. And some of the stuff we hit with the data. So let me go ahead and
Okay.
share here.
I've also heard that people say, well, math is boring. I mean, so
math is beautiful language of the universe. I don't know where they
so
get
I
that
think
from.
so the teachers to be in front of the class on a unicycle juggling flaming hatchets.
Absolutely not. But they can make it
math is boring.
They can make it relevant though.
Right. Okay.
Right. They can show some excitement and act like they want to be there. Right.
So
they can show a
walk us through
belief in children. So you kind of hit some of these things, and I'm hoping to today for people that are going to be viewing this that we've identified the problem areas. And then we want to identify solutions. And any plan that you implement, you want a 3 to 5 year plan. People come in wanting to mark their territory, they change things up. You've looked at this already, but specifically the data really hit middle school. It really hit middle school Black students. So middle school students were hit the hardest. Here it is by race. We've already looked at this where 9% are proficient. I don't want to spend more times. The scores, of course, there's an alarming disparity there. The other thing, I'm speaking about this piece with teachers. I'm even looking at back here, what's the homework, math chapters 14 and 15, right? But representation here matters, okay? When we look at the number of Black male teachers, and this is old data, but I imagine that it's probably still similar, okay? And then you look at the number of female teachers to the overall, that matters. I spoke about the belief gap. I just want to get to. Now, I did go to the page on professional development. When I see this anti-racist teaching learning, because I'm wondering, what are teachers learning? What is their post-training like once they're in the classroom? I'm also wondering about their content knowledge. Of course, I'm not an employee. I can't get in here because, again, this is an adult problem. And here are the things here that needs to be focused on with teachers. What is their content knowledge? Because here's what I can tell you. I don't care what type of teacher is in front of those Asian students. Those Asian parents are going to make sure that they have A's. Okay. So, but when it comes to Black children that don't have those resources, the teacher's mathematical content matters. The student epistemology, the teacher's understanding how students learn matter, and the teacher's knowledge of pedagogy. Those things matter.
Now, when you say the resources, what are you talking about?
All right. So in Chicago, I was meeting with a professor from UIC on the north side. So in Chicago, you have the north side, you have the south side. North side, think predominantly wealthy white.
Right.
South side, think Black, the students, what we're speaking of, right? Yeah. And one of the things she said to me, she said, Assata, there aren't vast differences between the teachers on the north and the south side. She said the difference is that the parents are going to make sure that their children have what they need. So if their children are struggling in mathematics, they're going to get a tutor. They're going to have them in STEM programs. Black children over the winter break, they're going to, in the Black schools, they're going to get a lot of homework over the winter break. A lot of them are going to come back and not want to do it. Black people don't believe that people don't believe that Black people should have vacations. She said a lot of the Black children will take vacations. They will travel. So the white schools up north don't typically give there. So that's what I mean about those. Whereas a Black student struggling on the south side of Chicago, they're afraid to show their parents their grades. Why? What typically happens? They get in trouble. They don't get a tutor. Okay. So that's what I mean as far as the resources. Teachers use, I'll say this, I went to observatory school on the East Coast. 73 teachers are observed. One was Black. Out of those 73 teachers that I observed 68% of them teaching a mathematical concept incorrectly.
Okay.
Okay. Again, what's going to happen with those children, the white and the Asian children in that district that have resources? Their parents are going to make sure that they have it regardless.
Yeah, let me say, well, that's interesting because, you know, here in San Francisco, we have the biggest Chinatown outside of China. And a lot of these families are multi-generational. Not everybody has money. They're not all wealthy, but yet
But they pass down a culture. That's what I'm speaking about, this past piece.
Okay.
Never in a point, whenever in Asian culture, was it a sin to be educated. Black people are the only one that had that experience. And I don't mean a sin, where it was a crime.
Right.
For any other people, it never in the history of their being was it ever a crime to be educated. That only happened to Black people.
Well, you went to a public school, and
Yes.
your parents are Black, and my parents are Black, and Jonathan. So this thing about all of a sudden, why would I? You know what? To be honest, those figures that came out for the nation, those are the lowest math scores in 30
ever recorded
years.
Since they actually,
Yes,
since they've been
since
recorded.
the first time
NWEA,
before,
that data said that was the worst data since they've been collecting data.
But getting a good education, doing well in school. I mean, you know, you hear stories about parents, you know, were sharecroppers. They didn't have any shoes, but the parents said, you know what, you have to go to school and make sure you get a good education. Do you see that still happening in the Black community?
Some,
Some,
not
So
enough.
some-
And not in the
something
same
happened.
proportion as others. Yeah.
Right. Something happened. Someone, so we got a couple of questions there, and somebody, you touched on something earlier about suspending the parent. They say, can you please explain what was meant by suspending a parent?
So let's say two children get into a fight. Instead of sending them home for 3 days, suspend a parent, inconvenience the parent. Now they have to take a day off work. They have to come in with their children. Parents will say things like, well, they're going to act right when I'm there. No, they don't. And parents get a chance to see how other children behave, not just their own. And then they get to see the interaction with the parents, and they develop more respect. The other thing is they don't want to take off from work. So they usually go home and handle whatever business they need to handle with their children to straighten them up.
Okay. Can you delve in more about the Black Math Genius curriculum and STEM and the wealth gap? And you have some very good charts and graphs there.
Yeah, let's and these were just some questions. I know that Dr. Farley would probably, you know, if we asked, you know, who came up with A squared plus B squared equals C squared, people would say what? Pythagoras, right?
Right.
But he didn't. Right.
He did not.
Right. If we ask people what happened when they multiply numbers, most people are going to say they get bigger. If you ask what happens when you divide them, they're going to say they get smaller. Well, that only applies when you're dealing with whole numbers. With integers, something different. With fractions. So this is the where we're not getting our content correct. But let's look at this wealth gap piece.
Yeah.
It's predicted that by the year 2053, Black net worth will be at 0.
Wow.
So you have to ask, how do they know that? How are they projecting 31 years out that Black wealth is? They're looking at math scores. They're looking at the top careers of the future, saying Black people aren't making the cut. So if you can't get into the top careers of the future, you're in the lowest careers. Well, right now, those lowest careers mean that we have an average income of less than $40,000 a year. Even those of us that are going to college, by default, 1 out of 5 Black people that go to college choose a major that's going to keep them impoverished for another generation.
Why is that?
Because we can't do the math.
There you go. It's
Right?
all math.
You go in saying you want to be a doctor, and then you get hit with those conversions, or you want to be an engineer, you have to take Calc 1. Now you're out the game. Okay. You look at the top 60 careers of the future, they're all math centered. Math and what's tied with math, well, I'm going to say math because even in that, computer science, learn how to code.
You know, it's
Okay.
funny that well, it's not. It's very ironic that on December 1st, you see those Google Doodles that come through
Mhm.
on Google. December 1st was the birthday of Jerry Lawson. He's credited with being the guy who's had the team that had the first video game cartridge, like at
Yes,
Atari.
yes, I saw that. Yeah.
And
Mhm.
I think it's people like him that should be heralded and celebrated when we have Black History Month.
Yeah, Mark
Kathy
Dean,
Johnson's, all the
right?
other
You can
folks. I
go
mean,
through. Yeah, exactly. You can
I
go
swear, if I
through
hear
them.
about Rosa Parks and
Martin Luther King
Jackie
and Malcolm
Robinson
X.
and ML King again, I'll jump out the window. We already know
Yes.
those folks.
Exactly.
I
And
kind of like Assata Shakur too.
And let's not forget Jonathan Farley Day.
Well,
absolutely.
okay.
Jonathan Farley Day. We got some more time. We got about another. Let's open up. We got some questions here. But so let's look at the.
Oh, but let me show you this though.
Go ahead, please.
Because how do we know the Black Math Genius things work? So let's look at some of my former students. Tevin Jones, engineer. Calhoun NICU nurse. Dr. Nandi Sharif, executive with Uber. Elon Brewer in tech. Sherelle, engineering. Dr. Jason Shear. Dr. Jason Shear, he came to us with an IEP. Okay, this is Avian Lane, and this is her brother, Brian Lane, doctor, engineer. Okay, I had to add 2 more to the list because these 2 just came up. Another one of my former students now, Dr. Eva Delt, Rodney Singleton, who also went to Michigan State because he loved what I was doing with him in engineering. And in March, he and I would be on a panel talking about the connection between what it would be like 25 years from when I was his teacher to now he now has his PhD. So he's actually Dr. Rodney Singleton in engineering. So I have not data points, right? We like to show the data points, but these are people points of students that I had when they were in middle school through high school that went out and went into STEM fields. That's the power of the Black Math Genius program. And that's the purpose of it. Not just to do well on test scores, that will come, not just to get good grades, that will come, but so that they become like these students here, where there are STEM professionals that build strong families and that start building wealth for their children that will follow them. And that in turns build what? Strong communities. That's the power in what we're doing with the Black Math Genius program.
We get a couple of questions or and you actually you touched on this. It says it's hard to attract good, experienced teachers to schools known for chaotic or violent classrooms. How can we improve or revise the implementation of restorative practices to provide safe and focused classroom spaces for all learners and teachers while providing counseling support for learners involved in disruptive or antisocial behaviors? I'm going to dovetail on what you just said, Assata, about you have the parents come in. And volunteer. I think parents should have to volunteer a day at this child's school and see what happens.
It's a lot of those things. I'll give you a couple of things that I did on the first day of school. We would do a back to school barbecue. And the parents had different assignments of what they were going to bring in. This class is going to bring in the paper plates. This class is going to bring in the seasons. This class from these fathers, they're going to do that. That was one thing, getting the parents into school. Another thing that I would do is I wanted 100% turnout for a high school. Typically in Chicago, 25% of parents come out for a report card pickup for high school. I got 97% in person and the other 3% by phone call. Now, there were a number of things that I do. One, you have to invest. I went out and I invested in counselors, specifically going to HBCUs, getting young Black men that look like them, bringing them in. I invested in Black male teachers, even though they didn't have a teaching background. 2 of them I got from a call center, met them in the Starbucks and said, I'll teach you how to teach it as long as you love our children and be a good role model for them. Okay. We have to want it. If we want it, it will happen. We have to put our resources and our money where our mouths are. If we want this data to change, we can make it change.
Right. Dr. Jonathan, so Morgan State, that's in HBCU, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Somebody says, what are your thoughts on detracking math? I'm not sure I understand what that is.
I don't understand that question. But so maybe the person can type in a clarification, but I can address the violence issue because I did teach at the Rochester STEM High School for a week. And because of the violent threats, I decided I don't need this. And I even sent back my first paycheck because I didn't want to have anything to do with the school. And that's why my solution is actually to expel students who are disruptive. It's only about 3% of students, but it makes it so the other 97% can actually learn. And then maybe we'll see some remanagement in the future. I also think that the problem with the family structure, even though obviously the slaves had a more chaotic family structure, today it's probably not really surmountable other than by just making sure African Americans from this point forward don't continue the pathology of the past. But what you can do in classrooms, to dovetail on what my colleague said, is have more aids for the to help the teachers. You know, why can't you have grandparents volunteering? They don't have to be teaching, they can just be a presence in the class. It might help the teacher keep control of the class, or I don't know, veterans who might come in to volunteer. Something along those lines might be useful. And you can also, at a low cost, get very highly qualified teachers, people with PhDs even in the subject, in math, if you recruit, say, Africans, right? So to someone from the Congo, the teacher's salary, even though American teachers might complain about it, they'll think it's great. and they'll be happy to come, and you can get people who might have PhDs in math teaching the students.
Right.
Now, you mentioned having relevant subjects. So the beauty of math is that a lot of it is in fact useless. That's what G.H. Hardy said. But there's about 1% of math that is useful, and it's extremely useful. And that's why people like me still get paid, fortunately. But the way to make relevant material is to have, for example, I tried to have create a curriculum involving counterterrorism. That's something that a high school student who later went on to be at MIT and then she got her PhD from Princeton and now is a postdoc at the University of Chicago. She actually wrote peer-reviewed papers applying, as a high school student, applying math, or actually as an MIT student too, applying math to counterterrorism. And that's the sort of thing that might be of interest to other students. Sure. Also, when I was working with a school in Hartsdale, New York, outside of New York City, I had some students do, it wasn't publishable research, but investigate how can we make March Madness more exciting? You know, how can we determine the initial matchups so that you're more likely, probabilistically, more likely to have a lot of close games? And you have to define precisely what you mean by all of that. But you could then turn it into a math question that these students actually did talk about, and they presented their findings in front of the rest of the school. So that might make some aspects of math more interesting, but even the pure aspects, students should love those as well. And just what is taught, you know, if you see a right triangle and then you're asked to prove that it's a right triangle, that's dull. But there are other aspects of math almost never taught in American schools, like graph theory, which 26 years ago now, I was talking in the Bay Area at the Bay Area Math and Science Project meetings. I was speaking to the teachers there, saying they should incorporate discrete math into the curriculum. And to this day, outside of special schools, I don't think you find it, but that would be exciting to students because not everyone needs calculus, but this would be an aspect of math that they wouldn't have seen. It's highly visual. They could get it very quickly, but still there are problems that no mathematician has solved. And so students could actually begin to think about what mathematicians actually do. Maybe they'll solve some of these problems.
Right. Hey, we have a couple more questions here. Someone said this is, seems to me that one thing you're saying is that teaching quality needs to be improved to help those who don't have the support at home. That is something that schools can address. But if we aren't able to change the home culture to where it supports and prioritizes education, will that be impactful and successful?
So
I'll say it this way. It would be most helpful to have the at-home component. It would help a tremendous amount. The flip side of that, when I was a principal and I was a teacher, I received the paycheck every 2 weeks to do a job. And so regardless of what was going on at home, it was my responsibility when they were in my classroom. And so that was what I worked on. making sure that I was developing good relationships with my students, making sure that I encouraged them to believe in themselves and to see what was possible, making sure that I held them accountable and to high standards, okay, and giving them rigorous work and demanding it. So one example was I had this one student and he had an IEP, but he had shown me that he was capable of learning at high levels. And so I didn't want to honor the IEP. And of course, I got in trouble with it all the way fighting up to dealing with the folks from CPS. But I refused to let him use that calculator because it was handicapping him. He was capable of doing more than what the IEP was calling for. And so what I'm saying is, yes, we would love to have the parental piece. But here's the thing. Okay, let's say the high school is violent. You mean to tell me that teachers can't get it right with their first graders, their second graders, their third graders? We can't get it right with our babies? Because when we set them off on a good, it starts to go wrong at 4th grade, not high school. That's an adult issue. Okay, that goes back to the belief gap, because when you're seeing those little Black boys in your classroom and you believe that all of that energy that they have can be transferred to something else, you know what? You have so much energy, put a net on the back of your door, have them shoot hoops for fractions.
Right.
Convert those fractions to decimals and percents. Connect with your children and believe in them.
That what they call it, the soft bigotry of low expectations.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to take a stab at the detracking question.
Go ahead.
And anyone can reach me via email after this is over if I didn't address the question. What I think the question is saying is, should we put everybody in the same classes? No advanced class, no remedial class. And the answer to that is no. I like advanced classes. There should even be gifted programs for gifted students. And that's something for the other students to shoot for. So you could perhaps move from the ordinary class up to the
I'm only with that if it's something that non-graded. So we did non-graded and that students are able to move. And I say that because one of the students that I showed you was Dr. Jason Shear, who's a doctor now. And if we didn't still teach him at high levels and had this idea of honors and gifted, he would not have fit into that. And in fact, his parents pulled him from where he was at and brought him to us because of the method that we were using. Tevin Jones was a C student throughout. He went to Indiana State University. He was struggling. I remember I was having a meeting in my office. I was his a principal at the time. I drove that 2.5 hour drive to Indiana, showed him how to study, went through that first test with him. And now he's an engineer who's the manager of the Purina plant down in Georgia, the only Black man that's in there. So if we had tracked him while he was out here game banging and doing these other things, getting in trouble, walking around with guns and fighting, and I did not pull him to the side and say, hey, you have the potential to still be great, even though you're a C student right now, that would not have worked for them. So we have to be very careful about that tracking piece because all children have genius in them. They all have different intelligences. And so we have to be very careful about streamlining some because who's going to fall the most are Black boys.
Right.
Well,
hey, do you guys okay if we go a little bit over time?
I am fine with that, yeah.
Okay.
So the boys did talk about the talented 10th.
Right.
And so personally, I can let others take care of the students who might be falling by the wayside. I don't have those capabilities, but what I know I can do is train people.
And that's fair as an individual, but schools can't do that. Systems can't do that.
Right.
But they do it in other countries. And there is the Bronx High School of Science.
Aren't the United States.
But there's the Bronx High School of Science, the Stuyvesant. So those are the schools that produce people who are going to go on to win Nobel Prizes or Fields Medals. And so I don't see why we should eschew that for
what do we
Black
do with those
students.
students that struggle?
well,
Because right now,
91%
91% of the students are struggling. So we get rid of the 91% and leave the 9%?
I say we focus on the talented 10th, exactly like Du Bois said. And the others, they can perhaps be inspired by if they see Ben Carson or someone achieving superstardom for his brain, that might be inspirational to them. But yeah,
Here's another quick
we're not
question,
saying
guys.
throw them in the garbage, but
No,
they,
no, no, we don't want to do that.
but we're also
But
throwing the Black geniuses in the garbage too.
right, we're
If
going
we
to say
say
W.
don't
Du
focus
Bois,
on them.
let's bring in Booker T. Washington. I said before, what about bringing back vocational training? Because isn't that math as well? When you have
Yes,
to
it
actually
is.
build something,
Trades, yes, it is.
right? Like a table, that's
Mhm.
math.
Yeah, so
when you
I
have to
wrote
cook
that in,
something, that's math and that's science.
Mhm.
yeah, so I wrote that in my article for Teachers College Record, that we actually should have a focus on vocational training. I entirely support that.
Here's a question right here. I think, do you believe every mathematically advanced Black student should have the right to take algebra in 8th grade? Because I think I said at the outset, algebra in California now algebra in 8th grade is by district. You can opt to have it or opt to push it off in 9th grade. SF Unified decided to wait until 9th grade to teach algebra.
I think they should have it as early as they're ready for it. If they're ready
Yeah.
for it in 6th grade, go for it.
Yeah,
I don't think that we should limit our students.
in fact, I did take it in 6th grade, if I remember correctly. So yes.
Okay. This is one challenge in SF Unified is that when we have higher level classes, there are very few Black children because of the data you showed. So the district seems to believe honors classes are a racket. I'm not sure but how do we still support and keep engaged high performing students? Why should they not receive an education that challenges them? I think you guys kind of already answered that.
Yeah, the math is racist canard actually is racist. And because it suggests that Blacks really can't do math. And of course, we know that Blacks can. So I'm not in favor of getting rid of honors classes or advanced classes or anything of the kind, even if it turns out very few Blacks today are actually getting in those classes. I actually don't think it's necessary that there be lots of Blacks surrounding you.
But you teach at an HBCU.
I teach at an HBCU, but nonetheless, I went to Oxford, and even at Harvard, it's hard for me to remember how many Blacks were in my classes.
Yeah, well,
I think one was in one class.
The data shows that HBCUs do better with our students
because they feel more comfortable.
And
you don't have
this history syndrome piece, this confidence piece, those things matter.
Yeah, okay. Someone says about the home culture. Oh, no, here we go. I have no doubt that Black students can learn and excel in math. However, in San Francisco, there is poor achievement data about theirs also serving data on attendance. In SF, 63% of Black students are chronically absent. Why? And isn't this a significant contributor to the problem? Because if you're not in school, how are you learning?
Yeah, it probably is.
Look at what does that come from? All right, we always have to get into the why, the why of that. Yeah, I'm not sure either, but you definitely have to get into family dynamics and things with that. I don't know why that is. I know that Black truancy is an issue across the board. I know when I was with the University of Chicago and you ask high school students why, why do you want to come to a place where you're not doing well? Why do you want to come to a place where you don't feel respected? I don't know there. I'm going by data from, what we had here in Chicago during the time of that study, but it would be interesting to know the why behind that.
Students need to just care about education. I actually don't care a lot if the students don't care about education. There are teachers who can motivate people, like in Stand and Deliver. I'm not one of those teachers. So I want to focus on the students who want to be there. I have myself little interest in the students who don't want to be there. Other people can try to figure out how to motivate them.
Okay.
And you know what? And that's probably Dr. Farley, you at a college level, but in fact, I believe that is the mindset of most teachers at these elementary grade levels, and that's counterproductive. With especially,
well, I don't know if it is.
Well, the data says it is.
I don't know what data.
Well, only 9% of Black students are proficient, and what I'm getting at with working with teachers is that they do have that mindset, and I spoke before about the belief gap. We do not believe in the intellect of Black children. And so we have teachers in our classroom that feels like I'm here only for those that A, are on grade level and ready to learn, and two, those that want it, without getting into what is this facade, because no child is going to tell you that I don't want to be successful. I want to struggle in life. If we're not going to look at the why of the problems, then the problems are going to persist, which is why they're persistent. Data is getting worse for Black people. It's not getting better. So we have to look at things differently. There's a huge problem that 91% of the students are not meeting the mark.
Right.
I'm happy with the students who don't have the information, but want to get the information. I don't care about the students who are too lazy even to study.
Yeah, I mean,
And I'll focus on the talented 10th.
Right.
Although really it's like the talented 10th of a percent, but I'll focus on the talented 10th.
One other quick question, Assata. So what do you say to the parents or guardians to say, they're working, 2 or 3 jobs, say, I don't have the time to sit there to work with my children on math?
Yeah, I mean, that's the issue. I mean, because I would have, I know everyone in my family wouldn't have done well with a teacher like Dr. Farley, right? Because we came from a background where, my grandma had 11 children. There were, at one point, there were 8 or 9 of us living in a 2-bedroom. The conditions to be able to study wasn't there. Our parents worked multiple jobs, so we didn't have anyone helping us for homework. And I was the one, only because I'm older. Typically older people the older sibling has a different level of responsibility. And so a lot of the children in my household, my siblings, my cousins, would not have done well with that type of talented 10th approach. And so what was the question that you asked me?
What do you say to the parent or caregiver who works 2 or 3
Oh,
jobs?
yes.
I don't have the time to sit there and work with my children on math.
And so one of the conversations that I had with my teachers is how much homework. If the English teacher is given an hour of homework, the math teacher is given an hour of homework, the geometry teacher is given an hour of homework, do you really expect students are going to go home and do 3 hours of homework? I've seen teachers send home with students over the weekend a packet, 27 pages, double-sided with work. This is what I mean by we have to look at the system, and then we have to say, why is this not working? Tell me how many parents you've met that said, I don't want my children to be successful. Because if a parent has been working all day, if it's a single mother, single father, they've been working all day. By the time they pick the children up from after school, they get home, they have to make dinner, eat dinner, so on and so forth. It's 7, 8 o'clock at night. And now the child says, oh, by the way, I have homework that's going to take me 2 or 3 hours and I'm in 7th grade. Right? Okay. That's a problem.
So,
and we have to look at our systems. One of the things that I did was to look at how much homework. One of the things I say is that the maximum amount of work you should be doing outside of the school day is 10 minutes for each grade that you're in. So if you're in 6th grade, you should be spending no more than 60 minutes doing all of your homework. That's math, science, ELA, whatever it is that you have. But you'll have students that go home with just an hour worth of math on their own. And the other thing is, the parent is there just to make sure the homework is being done. We should not expect our parents to have to teach the subject. If a student is coming home and not understanding, and then they don't have notes because the teacher has sat up there and used technology all day, they logged into this, take out your computer. I'm not even seeing good, high quality instruction. I'm seeing teachers say, open up your Google Classroom, go to this and look at this. That's not teaching. Okay. And that is what I mean. If you're a parent, you go home to a parent that's an engineer versus a parent that's a CNA and has to work all of these shifts, that parent that's an engineer is going to make sure that their child gets it no matter what the teacher has done.
Okay.
John, in terms of poverty, Ethiopia is not a wealthy country. Haiti is not a wealthy country. I'm sure that the Ethiopians and Haitians who come to America, their kids are studying the math and probably doing well. And even here, the slaves were poor. Booker T. Washington was poor.
They were enslaved Africans.
No, they're slaves. I don't care about the terminology.
Africans.
There's a definition.
That's part of the problem. That's what we have.
Yes, it is.
And
okay,
so when we're referring to our students,
it is part of the problem.
And they're knowing them as slaves.
The fact that you're going to argue about this is the problem. I agree.
This is a conversation for another time. We're out of time, unfortunately. But folks, here's the deal. The time for hand wringing and pearl clutching is over. It's time for results, not rhetoric, because we see what we're doing is not working. The Black Math Genius, that might be one way. Lattice theory at Morgan State, that might be another way. But what we do know is that the community, the Black folks, have to come together and demand better of our schools and of our children. Let's get that rigor back in there.
Well, I also give talks on how to get straight A's at Harvard, so and that applies to every university.
On that note,
it's a practical
if you
note.
want for questions, comments, or concerns, folks, you can email me at kevintr62@yahoo.com. I want to thank my guests, Ms. Assata Moore, creator of Black Math Genius, and Dr. Jonathan Farley of Morgan State University. I'm Kevin Robinson, education activist, and I want to thank you all for joining us.